Hello and welcome to the Virtual Podcast. My name is Emily McFarlane. I am your host, and today I've got two trailblazers of the Australian medicinal cannabis industry with me. I've got Ben Risby-Jones and Emily Rigby from The People's Plant, a company that is focused on making medicinal cannabis more affordable and accessible to everyday Australians. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you, Emily, for having us.
I really wanted to start with why this is such a crucial part of the industry. Why are you focusing on accessibility and affordability, and what are the barriers to entry for people who really need it?
The barriers of entry that we've heard time and time again is people struggle to afford their medication. It's an ongoing expense. It's a weekly expense. So it's something that needs to be integrated into the cost of living for a lot of people. And it's just a struggle. So what we're trying to do, we're addressing that, and we're able to do that in a way that meets their needs. So it's not about discounting products. It's actually about setting up the whole business model on a different parameter where the cost of production is much lower, and refining all the different steps through the process so that we can actually deliver a high quality product, but at a much less expense for the end consumer. It's who we're actually really genuinely wanting to help.
Can you give me an example of how much a product might cost to a patient?
Yeah, so on average, say 10 grams is between $100 and $150. What we're wanting to do, we will probably have larger volumes because the packaging process is actually the expensive part for us. The cost of production is very streamlined. We're able to produce a product, I'd like to say at least 20% of the cost of most producers. Will be able to produce it at 80% less. So that's our part, the cultivation part. Then there's the packaging and the distribution and the pharmacy dispensing costs on top of that, which we have no control over. But at least we'll be able to stage the beginning of the medicine, the cost of the medicine, at a much lower price point. Yeah.
And how does the People's Plant approach this from a business perspective? How are you ensuring that you're able to keep up with demand, you're able to keep costs low, you're able to ensure that, you know, you've got a steady supply chain that you can actually, you know, continue to make a product that is going to be, you know, at a quality that and a consistency that people can rely on?
That's actually a really good point. Back in 2019, we went over to California. We actually went to Oregon and a few different states, and we saw what happens in a mature market. Everyone starts out making heaps of money and everyone's happy. And then as competition progresses, there's downward pressures. And a lot of the producers, if they're not streamlined from out of the gate, they start to get excluded from the market. They're just simply not viable. So what we did, we saw a mature market back in America, back in 2019, and we saw what was going to happen here in Australia. So we've based everything, all our business modeling, on a mature market, knowing that the cost per gram of cannabis is going to become much, much less over time. So everything that we've done right from the start is based on efficiency, streamlining, and really being in a position where we can thrive in a mature market. And that's kind of what we're seeing at the moment in Australia. Is there's a bit of a shake-up. Producers that aren't able to be efficient are starting to struggle to actually meet the market where the market currently is. Whereas we've sort of preempted that. So we're looking, 12 months from now, 2 years from now, 3 years from now, those price points will start to stabilize. And that stability in the market, which is possibly even lower than what some of the producers are able to produce it for, that's where we're really going to thrive in that environment. That's kind of the modeling that we've done.
And probably to add to that, Emily, we've got the option to grow under various different cultivation methodologies, which includes also being able to grow outdoors in a perpetual outdoor hybrid model, which means we can grow outdoor year round, which really helps us streamline and significantly reduce the input costs that go into producing medicinal cannabis. And, and one of the positives, which, really aligns with the ethos of the People's Plant, is it makes us more environmentally responsible while we're also being socially conscious as well when it comes to really serving the patients. And they're the ones, that this is really about.
100%. So there's still a lot of regulatory hurdles that people have to jump through to be able to access medicinal cannabis in Australia versus in other environments such as the US. How are the People's Plant addressing those, beyond just the business scope?
I'll let Emily talk.
Yeah, look, I've been involved in the medicinal cannabis industry here in Australia since legislative changes in 2016. And while we have made some advances in reducing the regulatory burden, there's still a significant amount of red tape that we need to remove. So the People's Plant is licensed by the ODC for our facility. However, it still is a significant barrier for people entering the market who want to grow cannabis in Australia. And so we are hoping to see a lot more Australian grown cannabis. But to do this, we need people, all stakeholders involved in the industry, to help lobby the government. So I work as part of the Australian Medicinal Cannabis Association. I sit on the board of directors, and we are constantly working with the Office of Drug Control, with the Therapeutic Goods Administration, in order to streamline the processes for the industry, but also for patients and doctors.
Great. And how do you see telehealth and other digital platforms improving access for people in potentially remote areas or who might struggle to see an actual medical professional in person?
Yeah, the telehealth, I think we've got COVID to thank actually for the boom and the public and professional acceptance for telehealth services, because in the early days it was actually really difficult for patients to find a doctor who was educated and confident in prescribing cannabis. And so the fact that we've seen this boom in telehealth does mean that patients, no matter how remote they are, can get access to a doctor or a nurse practitioner that is, well educated in prescribing medicinal cannabis. So we've just seen an exponential increase in the number of patients getting access. And it's great because it does mean that people who do live in remote areas are able to find the professional help that they need without actually even leaving the comfort of their home.
I'm sure you would have seen firsthand a lot of patients, who've struggled to actually get their hands on the medicine that they need. Do you have any examples of people that that have struggled with this, that have inspired you to push forward in this space?
Oh gosh, look, I would probably say, looking at some of the history, I think we have Lucy Haslam and her son Dan Haslam, to really thank for all of their hard work that they did. Unfortunately, Dan is no longer with us, but he and his family were accessing medicinal cannabis before it was legalized because they were desperate, and they ended up there as a last resort, and they could not believe just how much it helped their son. And so there was a patient who couldn't get access. I know of multiple patients that have issues with their supply or with their affordability. And then, there's a lot of children that suffer as well from epilepsy and seizures, and it just breaks your heart. And it is some of these cases in the early days and prior to legalization, and not just in Australia, but around the world, that have really, touched the hearts of our politicians, who are the people in charge of the regulations, that have helped us actually move cannabis from a Schedule 9 substance to a Schedule 8 medicine, which means that doctors can prescribe it.
And I know that you actually have quite a bit of personal experience of, why you've been particularly drawn to the medicinal cannabis space. Could you tell us a bit about your story?
Yeah, sure. So my background is a naturopath or a medical herbalist. I've had, so part part of studying as a medical herbalist, we learn about 300 or 400 different herbs. And medicinal cannabis is just simply not in the materia medica. The materia medica is the culmination of medical herbs. When medical cannabis became legal back in 2016, it sort of really spurred an interest in me because it's such a profound herb. It has such a broad range of actions, and the therapeutics that come from medicinal cannabis, it's just insane that we're not utilizing it as a resource. So I was particularly interested in it. I had just finished a business that I was running, and I was looking for something new back in 2017, 18. I just finished a drug and alcohol rehabilitation centre. I was actually really quite burnt out from it. I had my own health challenge at the time that I've had to work through, and medicinal cannabis was actually an integral part of my own recovery process in my own personal journey. And for me, I saw it as a patient, coming from the patient side, and it's just straight up really expensive. Like, there's no confusion about that. If you're a patient and you need high doses, it's incredibly difficult to afford. And to me, that struck me as it's just not right. If you've got someone that's sick, you know that a particular medication should be affordable, but it's not, and they can't access that because they just simply can't keep paying the amount of money that it costs. To me, that's a bit of a crime against humanity. Like, particularly a herb, like a herb that grows in the garden. It should be accessible. It's insane that it's restricted access to it, to be honest, in my mind. That it's something that's so valuable, something that is so accessible, and it should be so accessible, that there's so much legislative restriction around it, and then it's pushed into a pharmaceutical type perspective, with all the regulatory gates that the pharmaceutical industry holds. It just makes it harder and harder and harder for people that actually need the medicine to access it. So we're doing our best. We have the ability to make it more affordable. We are doing our best at sort of trying to present an argument in a lobbying environment to help the regulatory framework start to become more accepting that medicinal cannabis is actually a very, very helpful medicine for a lot of people. So we're doing our best, but it's a journey. Like, from a patient perspective, I've seen the medicinal cannabis industry evolve, and I don't personally think it's evolved in maybe the best way for the patients. It's sort of been largely profit driven, and I think that can be changed. We as a population here in Australia have an opportunity now to address this. We have an opportunity to all get together and actually make a difference. That's what I'm wanting to present. Like right here, right now, I'm wanting to say to everyone, we can actually change the whole direction of the medicinal cannabis industry. The people's plant cannot do it alone. It needs the support of the people, both as a CSF, but also as a reciprocation. We're able then to offer something back to everybody that is going to support them and help them in a very, very real way. So that's really the thrust of what we're trying to do here. Is we're trying to create something that's incredibly valuable and incredibly helpful to so many people, and actually make it accessible in a way that we're able to influence it, as well as, I guess, the next step after accessibility is then developing an understanding of how to use it properly and having a healthy relationship with that medicine. Because as with all things, it can also be abused. So there's a maturity that is required as we move out of this hard, restrictive environment, where it's regulations are restricting access. As that starts to change and evolve, people will have the capacity to then start to access it and then abuse it possibly, but then they need to develop a mature relationship with that plant, so that they're actually gaining the benefits from it without the detriment.
Right. This might be a stupid question, but why is it so expensive?
If I'm being honest, I think it's people just making money when they can make money.
Right. So it's not necessarily about the patient. It's not patient forward. It's profit forward.
100%. They might say it's all about the patient, but they're just making money.
Yeah. It's so disappointing. And equally, there's a huge industry for illegal cannabis that's being sold in Australia. What's the statistics around that versus legally sold cannabis in Australia?
It's a little bit hard to capture, but from my understanding, the current Australian medical cannabis market is about 1/10 the size of the illicit market that's currently in existence in Australia. So as we evolve through time and that regulatory change starts to evolve further, that transition from that 90% of the people that are still not in the legal market will start to transition across. And that's something that we're really wanting to encourage. It gives confidence that the product is clean, it has no detrimental fertilizer, it has no chemicals in it. There are very, very important and beneficial aspects to a regulatory environment, and some of that is the quality controls. That's really important.
Do you think that the illegal cannabis market in Australia is bigger than it should be because accessibility and affordability is such a crucial problem in the legal sector?
I think the illegal market has existed for forever. That's just reality. So if we just call a spade, people want access. If they don't get access through a legal way, then they'll find access through another way. So it just needs to be brought into the light of day, to transparency. Just make it real. So people are going to access it one way or another, and that's kind of the biggest advocate for medicinal cannabis is medicinal cannabis and how much people want to access it. Right. Beyond anything anyone can say, people want it. And through all the hurdles that the regulatory environment have tried to put up and all the punishments that are implemented, people still access it. They still risk. And it's people, that's another thing that I think is absolutely amazing, is you've got people that are probably depressed or going through hard times, and then they start gardening and they want to start growing this plant. And the actual process of growing a plant, that's in the illicit market, that is a healing process in itself. So this plant has so many layers that it helps and supports and lifts up people that are having a hard time. So I think it's not to be underestimated, the different layers that are involved in this. It's quite a magic space to look into. And as this transition is happening from the illegal to the legal market, there will be, speed bumps and challenges, but as that takes place more and more and more, I think it's going to be a very, very exciting landscape, and it's going to be very dynamic. And I think we need to be able to adapt and meet those challenges as they occur. So part of our ethos as a business is having the capacity to pivot very quickly and very easily, and having many, many, many arrows in our quiver.
Because as we've seen, prohibition doesn't work. The war on drugs, whether it's cannabis or other substances, it doesn't work. People and cannabis have had a very long symbiotic relationship. Its first recorded use dates back 10,000 years. Its first recorded medical use about 4,000 years ago. So we have a very long history. We've evolved with this plant, and despite prohibition, despite the war on drugs, cannabis has remained the most widely used illicit substance around the world, as Ben said, despite the risk of legal action, becoming a criminal. People have still chosen to use this plant, and so we really believe that we need to put this plant back in the hands of the people. We don't agree with how cannabis is currently scheduled, but we are very happy that it's being opened up more, and we want to be involved in helping to free this plant even more, not just in when it comes to the regulations, but also in affordability, because we have a history with this plant, and that's why people have continued to consume it. But we want to bring people into the legal market, because no one should be a criminal for their choice of medicine, or even for that matter, their choice of for recreation. You know, here in Australia, we can go to, you know, one of the liquor store big chains and walk out with a trolley or even 2 trolleys of booze, and apparently that's okay. But to think that someone might want to consume cannabis when they finish work on a Friday afternoon, and that is something that's not acceptable, just doesn't really sit right with me. So we're, you know, first and foremost for patients, to make sure that patients are getting access, but it's really unnecessary regulatory burden surrounding this plant, and we want to help change that.
You guys keep answering my questions before I go to ask them. Because I was going to say, you know, why is there such a stigma around medicinal cannabis, around recreational use of cannabis versus having a drink? You can go to a bar and have a drink, and look, whilst it might be fun, we all know it's not medicine, is it? It's not good for you. But there have been potential, you know, benefits medically from cannabis. It's just interesting to look at it from that lens, that the government is so hell-bent on keeping it away from people who in a lot of cases actually need it, but they're happy to have alcohol in the hands of people who don't need it. I mean, can you actually, hand on heart, say that people need alcohol?
No, yeah, it's probably an interesting little history lesson, which I'll try and keep really brief. But, you know, to answer your question, a lot of it is because of misinformation and stigma that dates back to Prohibition. And it's really interesting to note that before Prohibition of cannabis was Prohibition of alcohol. So if you go back and have a look, to the listeners who are interested, look up Henry J. Anslinger in the US.
I have read about him. It's very interesting.
And it's, you know, it's actually quite racist, and it's based not on fact, yet somehow, you know, the rest of the world followed suit in prohibiting cannabis use. And it's actually heartbreaking, particularly as a medicine, because we'd be 70 or 80 years more advanced in cannabis as a medicine had we not had prohibition. But again, we live very stressful lives. Why is it a crime if cannabis actually helps you relax and makes you feel good at the end of the day, as opposed to going to the pub and having a beer, you know, and when that helps? So we do live very busy, stressful lives, and we do need different, you know, to be able to reach for different things, you know, whether it's a beer or a glass of wine or a joint or exercise or a walk on the beach. We all have different ways of unwinding and dealing with the stresses in our lives. And I really think, you know, cannabis has unfortunately been really demonized, you know, for a really long time, and we've removed a lot of the stigma, and we need to just keep educating, keep talking about it, keep normalizing cannabis as a plant, and bring it back into the hands of the people, bring it back into our gardens, have it part of health and wellness as well as medicine. You know, but we agree here at the People's Plant, we're not against cannabis being used recreationally either.
Yeah.
Great. Oh no, you go, Ben. You go.
Yeah. Alcohol is probably the easiest thing to correlate it with. And as Emily said, Emily on this side, is from the People's Plant, you can go into a bottle shop and you can purchase a lethal dose. You know, it's pretty easy. You only need probably 1 or 2 bottles of hard liquor, and it's probably enough to kill you. There is no lethal dose of cannabis, other than maybe if you had such a large volume it squashed you. Like as far as safety goes, you look at alcohol and you look at domestic violence, you look at violence and aggression in general. You compare alcohol and cannabis. It's you take all that horrible aggression out of you know, social environments. It's chalk and cheese. It's bizarre that alcohol is accepted and cannabis is demonized. I believe this will transition as we mature as a society. We start to realize the misleading information that we've been fed. We're able to start to see through some of that misleading information with maturity, and then we're able to actually develop a relationship with different substances with maturity. So I did used to run a drug and alcohol rehabilitation centre. You don't get people going there with cannabis misuse problems much. by the time they get to a rehabilitation centre, they're normally hitting rock bottom. So alcohol, you can hit rock bottom pretty quick. Meth, amphetamines, pharmaceutical drugs. We had a lot of different substance abuse. Cannabis was not one of them. Like, that says volumes in itself, doesn't it?
It's really fascinating to think about, and I read a book called The Scream, which really opened my eyes to prohibition and where it came from and how it just doesn't work. Like, Emily, you're absolutely right. It's crazy to think that we have been fed this kind of misinformation, and it's kind of what you believe. Like, why would you be questioning something that you've been taught since you were really, really young? But there's a whole education piece around it now, and I think I've seen a lot of what you've done, Emily, in terms of advocating for medicinal cannabis in Australia and recreational cannabis. And I'd love to hear a bit from your perspective on the milestones that you've seen Australia actually hit over the years and where you foresee it going in the future.
Yeah, great question. Look, I didn't think I'd see cannabis legalisation in my lifetime, so I'm just amazed at where we are today. I will be honest, it has definitely at times been frustrating, but I think when we look back, it's actually quite incredible. So we saw legalisation for medical and research purposes in 2016. And in that time, I must say, when I first jumped, thought about jumping ship, I should say, from the industry that I was working in already, at the time, I really thought it was career suicide. But I did, I visited a few facilities in the US and in Canada and Israel, and I was really encouraged, to don't worry about the stigma, don't worry about, what you think your reputation might end up being by all of a sudden, speaking up and moving into supporting medicinal cannabis and trying to enable that industry and enable patient access. And I really found, to begin with, 9 times out of 10, if I told someone what I did, I had negative comments come back. This was in the early days, 2016, 2017. For example, people saying, well, don't you know it causes schizophrenia? And, cannabis is actually used to treat schizophrenia. So, there's a lot of misinformation out there. But I'd even have comments of people saying, oh, but, if we have access to medical cannabis, people will turn up to work stoned. And it's like, well, there's alcohol. Do you turn up to work drunk? No, we're responsible adults. We know how to, where things are appropriate and so forth. Now I would say 9 times out of 10 when I mention what I do, people will tell me that it's either themselves or a loved one that is on medicinal cannabis and is receiving fantastic results for their symptom management. And that's in the space of 8 years. I was afraid to tell people what I did to now, like the good news stories that I just hear every day about people getting benefit from having access to this plant. We're now seeing, we've got data just showing the increase in public acceptance for cannabis as a medicine, but also just cannabis in general. We're seeing a lot of people go, oh, what I was raised on, all this misinformation, all this reefer madness, to the listeners who are aware of that. We're realising that we were fed a lot of incorrect information and we've been removing the stigma. We've been educating people, from the grassroots all the way through to, our medical professionals and regulators who, again, it's not their fault. It's not what they were taught. We've all been subjected to, almost a century of misinformation, and it takes a long time to correct that. But we are seeing a huge swing in public acceptance, not just as a medicine, but even for recreational use. And I think people are just realising that the harms, as Ben mentioned before, the harms for alcohol and even cigarettes are a lot worse when we look at the harm to the user and the harm to the community. When we actually look at this, and there was a great study done in the UK by Professor David Nutt back in 2010, and cannabis is well below alcohol and tobacco when we look at the risk to the consumer and the risk to the community. So we've really had this around the wrong way, and we're slowly but surely seeing the tides turn, but it takes time in our legal system in order for us to do that.
You've absolutely unlocked a core memory in my brain of when I was at school. I went to a Catholic private girls' school, and drug and education chats were rife, constant. We were constantly being told to say no to drugs, say no to alcohol. And I remember one particular learning that we got was if you smoke marijuana, you will get schizophrenia. I was terrified. I believed every word that they told me. I believed that if you took an ecstasy tablet, your muscles would overheat and you'd die. And I believed every single word. There was no question in my mind. And it's really interesting that this is what is fed to the younger generation, who are then going to go on after school and think that, you know, this is going to kill you. This is going to completely mess with your brain psyche. This is it. And then they grow into adults who are, spreading misinformation, and they think alcohol's okay. I mean, we're at the point now where younger people are sober curious, which I think is a really interesting time. And we're seeing like a real big change in people's mindsets. Where do you think these kinds of conversations should start in terms of educating people around what the actual effects are of cannabis, whether it be medicinally or recreationally?
Well, first and foremost, I mean, thanks for sharing your personal story, but fear doesn't work. And just say no, and the war on drugs doesn't work. Knowledge is power. To think
100%.
to think back, to not talk about something or to say it's taboo doesn't help, because if a child then is curious, they have no one, to talk to about that journey. And even as adults, I mean, I can tell you the conversations I have now with my mum about cannabis are very different to some of the conversations that we had as a teenager. And she, through education and through our conversations, she's one of my biggest fans, but she's also, is just in awe of how fantastic cannabis is as a medicine, and also, a little bit more lenient to cannabis use even recreationally, but it's not how it doesn't serve anyone when we just have misinformation or we don't talk about something. So I think the more we can have these conversations and normalize drug use, no matter what it is. Pharmaceuticals are being abused at the moment. Not talking about it, sweeping it under the carpet doesn't fix the problem, it makes it worse. So being able to just normalise discussions around drug use, and in particular cannabis, but also, alcohol use. We're seeing kids at the moment having, issues with using these tasty, weird flavoured vapes and things like that. Bringing in prohibition to not not sell them legally doesn't actually fix the problem. We need education. And so around cannabis, we need to just be normalising the conversation around cannabis use, whether it's medical or recreational, and actually teaching the correct education, right from the schooling system all the way through adulthood. We are seeing a lot of media recently in regards to cannabis use disorder, because as Ben said before, every substance, whether it's water, salts, alcohol, even exercise can be abused. So we need to be enjoying or consuming responsibly. And the more we talk about it, the more we normalise it, and the more we can support each other as a community to work through whatever issues we may be having, or to be able to use cannabis in a responsible manner and develop a really healthy relationship with this plant.
Definitely. And it feels like the People's Plant are huge advocates for that, and, making sure there's a big education piece. What is the key point of difference for the People's Plant's agricultural model, and how you can be harvesting all year round?
We started our journey as cultivators 5 years ago. And because it hadn't been done in southeast Queensland, large commercial scale, legally, you saw it a little bit in the news, illegally, but it hadn't been done before. So we really started on a baseline. We were planting seeds in the ground. And then as we progressed, we would learn, okay, this will work for certain periods of time. Seeds in the ground, okay, one harvest a year. There's a season. What are the risks with that? You have a big weather event, you lost a lot. You have to wait till next year. Well, that's a big risk. Okay, we need to evolve beyond that risk. So we just would place these measures every time we would come across a challenge. We would say, how do we resolve that challenge? How do we get over that obstacle? And we've developed a methodology now that I don't believe in a commercial sense. I personally haven't seen it anywhere in the world, where it's very zen. We only apply the amount of technology and the amount of intervention required for the maximum benefit. And we're taking risks out as we start to implement these ways of cultivating. So we've evolved to a point where we're supplementing light for a vegetative state. I don't want to go too deep into it because I want to keep everyone engaged, but we're able to vegetate all year round, and because of our latitude, we're actually leveraging on our placement in the world. Because of our latitude, we're able to put it outside and it will go to flower. So we are implementing a little bit of technology with extending its light period, because cannabis is a photoperiod plant, so meaning that the amount of, or the lack of light that it has, like its sleeping period, dictates when it's in its different phases. It's either in its growing vegetative state or it's in its sort of flowering reproductive stage. So as that lack of light gets bigger, up to the 12 hours-ish, then it goes into its flowering period. So we're able to then basically, perpetual harvest means that we're able to vegetate the plant in a greenhouse and then put it in a protected cropping environment outdoors every 2 weeks, all year round, and it will go to flower, and we will finish it outdoors. And at different times of the year, it will be more suitable for certain different products. Some will be for inhalation flowers and some will be for extraction. But the different seasons will sort of provide challenges, but yet solutions for the different sort of aspects of cultivation. It's actually pretty technical when you sort of get into it. But so basically we've developed, I'm trying to keep this real simple. We've developed a methodology where we're able to produce as streamlined as absolutely possible. So we're only putting in the amount of electricity, whether that's through air conditioning or HVAC or dehumidification or artificial lights or all those things. We're keeping that to an absolute minimum, and then letting nature actually do the heavy lifting on the growing of this plant.
Yeah, because I think a lot of people don't realise how much actually goes into growing these plants, in particular in other countries as well. So if you are getting an imported product, a lot of the time the actual growing conditions aren't conducive to healthy flowering plants. Then they're going to be grown in a greenhouse, which needs humidifiers, which needs heat lamps. And then from that, you're having to put it on a plane or a boat. That costs money. That's putting emissions into the planet. Like, there's a whole rife of issues of importing it into Australia versus homegrown products. Wouldn't you agree?
100%. Like, the vast majority of our products here in Australia at the moment are coming from Canada. I love people from Canada. I love Canada as a country, but in my mind, it just does not make sense to grow, a subtropical plant or a tropical plant in a very cold environment. So it's in greenhouses or sometimes in completely indoors. So they're working against nature from the very beginning. So it's a very heavy carbon footprint right from the get-go. I've read articles suggesting as much as, say, 3.5 kilograms of carbon dioxide is produced for every gram of cannabis that's grown. And then they ship it halfway around the world. That's madness, particularly when Australia is in such a pole position for cultivating. It's literally madness. The regulatory environment has made it very difficult for cultivators to actually get off the ground, but we're giving it a go. We need some help.
And so is that why you're raising capital now, to expand the business and ensure that you can deliver a premium product to Australia?
Yes, that's exactly right. We've done all our R&D for the last 5 years. The founders have funded that, as well as close friends and family. We are now at a point where we're ready to commercialize. We can scale. We know what we're doing. We've got everything lined up. We're what's called shovel ready. We've got the greenhouses being delivered. It just needs to be erected or installed. We're totally ready. So that's why we're raising funds at the moment. So to go from an R&D phase to stage 1 commercial phase. And that's what we need support with. And that will give us the ability to then serve the Australian population.
And why have you decided to go down the equity crowdfunding route versus a traditional fundraising route, such as venture capital or a bank loan?
Yeah, so the people's plant, by the people, for the people. It's a match made in heaven. So I would, in my heart, from the very beginning, if we were able to change people's lives, like everyday people's lives, in a positive way through their investment, as well as through the medicine itself. Like, that was my goal. If we're able to support, everyday people to pay their mortgage off quicker, anything of that nature, that excites me. Whereas having an anonymous venture crowd sort of making them heaps of money, that didn't really ring my bell. To me, that really didn't probably change anyone's life. Just makes a venture crowd prospect even more better. I don't know. It's not really where I'm at. I'm very much trying to actually help people, real people in everyday lives, and bettering it. Like, to me, that's awesome. If we can do that, then we have reached our objective.
Yeah, I think speaking with your team and working with your team over the last few weeks, it's something that shines through every day that I speak to you, the passion, how much you want to do this for people, and it's not for profit. And I think that a lot of people will really be able to see that. And having new shareholders on board through equity crowdfunding, they're not just shareholders, they're ambassadors for your business, and they're the ones who are going to be hopefully shining a light on the cause that you are so passionate about.
Yeah, I think it's one of the, really exciting things here at the People's Plant is we want to bring the people with us on this journey, and we really want to put the cannabis plant back in the hands of the people where it belongs. Now, we don't have the power to do that because we don't write the regulations, but if we can bring people on the journey with us, and and part of our rewards program allows different tiered investors to be involved, in giving product feedback, in competitions to help name strains, to even come and have farm tours. So we've got, we really want to interact with all of you who want to come and join us on this journey and really make a difference. When I stepped into medicinal cannabis, I really wanted to make a difference to humanity. The job I was working in before, which was ornamental horticulture, because I've got a background in growing. Not to say that flowers and ornamental, like pretty plants in the garden, don't make people happy. I really found that, this movement of cannabis is so much bigger than me, and it really has the opportunity to give back when it comes to health and wellness. I can think of people in my own family that perhaps would still be here if cannabis had been available as a medicine, previously. But we need to change that today, and we'd love everybody to come on the journey with us. We want all of you to be part of the People's Plant journey.
For sure. You mentioned your rewards for your equity crowdfunding campaign. Can you give me a little bit more light on what they are?
Sure. So there's different tiers, and I'm not going to list them all, and I don't want to make any mistakes because they will come out in the offer document. But we've got some welcome gratitude packs that include merch from, simply just stickers through to hats and hoodies. We're offering high tier investors to actually be able to come to the farm and do a tour with us. But we're also going to, provide everybody with updates, virtual tours of the farm. We really want to bring you on the journey. We have, as part of our dedicated R&D program, we do a lot of in-house plant breeding. So we're going to have competitions for naming strains. Ben, I'm sure I'm missing things. Is there anything you want to add?
Yeah, so we'll also have for our the people who have sort of supported us, we will also support them through concession access to the products if they have to qualify and go through the normal means through a doctor's appointment and everything. But that's a way we can say thank you. Is if you're supporting us, we couldn't make it happen without you, and we're going to give back to you by subsidised product.
Amazing. Thank you so much for taking the time to sit down with me today. I feel like I've learnt a lot, and I hope that our viewers and our listeners have learnt just as much as I have today. And I really appreciate you being on the virtual platform and bringing your passion to the people. So thank you so much for being on the podcast today.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for having us.